Isabelle, thank you very much for joining us, and a delight to have opportunity to speak with you. And I know that folk in the diocese in Europe will be really interested to hear from you today. Isabelle, you're a French lady and you find yourself working in a senior position now in the Church of England. So perhaps you can share with us something of your background and journey.
Yes, I'm as surprised as most other people actually when I stop and think how a French person ended up where I am. But I grew up in central France, right in the middle, in a very, very secular family, as secular as it can possibly go. And my hometown actually didn't even have a resident Roman Catholic priest because it was such a secular town as a whole. But there was a tiny little Protestant church plant in the town that had been planted by Swiss missionaries. And their daughter was my age and went to school with me. We went to secondary school together, and her dad told her she had to evangelize me and give me a Bible. So she did. And I read the Bible and became a Christian. And so my journey started there. And I grew in faith in the French Protestant church primarily. I went to university and did English at university, and ended up coming to England for a year, as you do as part of a degree. And then after my year in England, I got um, a, a post at the University of Nottingham as a teaching assistant. And I got really involved in the chaplaincy whilst I was at the university there, chaplaincy to international students primarily, but kind of slightly more widely. And I just got more and more involved in a church, in a local church, because I'd come from the French Protestant church. I went to a church that felt similar to me. So not an Anglican church, I have to say, back then, but a church that was a Baptist church that was much more similar to what I was used to. And that church nurtured me into leadership. So I started leading, and eventually I went to London Bible College to train for Baptist ministry. By then, I had met my husband, and my husband happened to go to a Church of England in Nottingham. He went to their evening service, which was all students, and it was so low, it was subterranean, really. You couldn't really tell the difference with where I had come from. But after we got married, I started going to that church. But I also got a job leading a local ecumenical partnership in Nottingham, working to bring Christians from different ethnic groups together to study scripture and to share about theology. And and therefore I was in contact. Well, it was a project set up by the Anglicans initially, but that was involving Black majority churches, Pentecostals, Methodists, just everybody. And it was a great job. It was absolutely fantastic to see that exchange and that growth in people's personal spirituality and their understanding of theology through relationship with people that were different. Um, I gradually kind of got more and more involved into our Anglican church. And we started migrating from the student service. We were getting a bit old for it, you see. Mid-20s, that's it. And went to the morning service. And again, for me, that was part of my journey into Anglicanism. That was a little bit more liturgical. Yes, I had a very big shock as a French Protestant on the day I got married, because our vicar appeared wearing robes for a wedding.
Ah.
I had never seen anybody wearing robes. And I just went, I'm the bride. I'm supposed to wear the white dress. But as the years went on, we lost several pregnancies, and at the time, we found that the kind of very informal, joyful worship that we were used to didn't really feed us anymore. And that's when we started going to an early morning service, which was a liturgical service, sacramental, and that's where I really connected with Anglicanism actually. And I felt that that service, the liturgy and the sacrament gave me words and a way to pray at a time when I couldn't find my own words. And that's probably the point at which my little French Protestant heart was converted into thinking about something broader. Having said that, I also found that the Church of England gave me a way of integrating different parts of what it had meant to be a Protestant in France, but have a family who had been Catholic in the past. My parents were, but my grandparents had been. And I felt that there was something in the middle there in the Church of England that was actually incredibly precious. And in the church that I went to in Nottingham, I just stopped and thought how incredible that we were able to make that journey from a service without liturgy, without robes, that was very low, all the way into a liturgical sacramental service and stay within the same local church. That there were people who went to both services, as we later did. The breadth and the wealth of that, to me, is something incredible that I haven't really seen in any other denomination.
Well, we do like to think of ourselves as a church with breadth and with humanity, and as a bridge church in Europe too, where we can talk both to Protestants and to Catholics. But then your journey took you to the very heart of the Church of England, to Lambeth Palace, to the grandeur of the palatial working environment at Lambeth. And how did that feel, Isabelle?
Well, how did that feel? Very, very strange. I mean, already when I considered being ordained in the Church of England, one of the big things I had to work through was swearing allegiance to the Queen. I worked as a university chaplain, then was a vicar in Nottingham. I taught at St. John's College, teaching ordinance, Old Testament, and I never really thought about the Archbishop very much when I was doing that. I was focused on what I was doing. But then I was looking to move on from my last post, and one of my friends posted something on Facebook, believe it or not, about this job as chaplain to the Archbishop of Canterbury. And I thought to myself, I didn't know the Archbishop as a chaplain. I wonder what they do. So I asked for the details out of sheer curiosity. God's leading, actually. I wish I could tell you a very profound story, but the reality is that I saw the job description and I told my husband, look, I think I could do this. And he told me, why don't you apply? And I said, don't be ridiculous. Why on earth would they want me? A, I'm not sure I'd have the skills. B, I'm French. I have no idea about the British establishment. So because I didn't believe they would give me the job, I did the application form in half an hour and sent it without really thinking about it. And to my immense surprise, they gave me the job. And actually being French was probably part of it, because Archbishop Justin loves France, has a house in France. And actually the two of us chatted a little bit in French during my interview. So that was part of it. But I find it quite an ambivalent experience being at the heart of the British establishment. On the one hand, Lambeth Palace is an exciting place to be, because you get to see some of the best of what the Church of England has and some of the best of the Anglican Communion. Being able to see what happens in the churches all over the world, and hearing the stories of Christians and Anglicans in the Congo, in Nigeria, in lots of places that are really difficult for people in South Sudan. I think that's extraordinary. But it was also a place of ambivalence, because it's an established church, because there's wealth, because a lot of the people I met had, were proper British people, or even
yes, indeed.
to a degree, might have gone to private or to public school. I always find the private public thing slightly strange.
They paid for their education. Yes.
Paying for education, had been to Oxford or Cambridge, all of that. And having brought up, not just in a secular family, but I have to say in a very socialist family, I had a lot of adjusting to do and a lot of reflecting on power and the nature of power, how we use power as a church. We step with integrity into the power that we have, whether we want it or not, as well.
And whilst you were at Lambeth as chaplain, you've been living through 4 years of Brexit.
Yes.
As a French woman, but at the heart of the British establishment. How has it felt for you living through the immense controversy and debate that Brexit has generated within England?
I found Brexit incredibly painful. So I moved to Lambeth just after the vote. So the vote happened when I was still in my parish, and most of the people in my congregation had voted for Brexit, which was really difficult. I had to lead a service on the Sunday after the vote, and I was in tears, and I had to tell my congregation, I'm not going to tell you whether it was right to vote one way or the other, but I do want to tell you how it feels being a stranger in your midst. I applied for British citizenship straight away, and I got it, so I'm now a dual citizen. But being at Lambeth was complex in terms of the emotions around Brexit, because of course we have to, accept the fact that a lot of Anglicans voted for Brexit, not all of them by a long stretch, but there's the divide that runs through the nation in England also runs through the Church of England. And I think one of the ways in which I've tried to deal with that for myself is to try and understand some of the underlying factors. So, how it feels for communities to feel they're in a world that has left them behind. I think some of the factors underneath Brexit are actually things that are happening elsewhere in Europe, and they might manifest themselves in different ways, but there is that sense of parts of the country being forgotten, rural parts of the country feeling left behind as well and disregarded. There's probably also a lot of anxiety about being in a world where everything is always in flux, people move around a lot. How do you find a sense of belonging somewhere that doesn't become exclusive and hostile to the other, but still allows you to belong?
Yes. Well, you give a very sympathetic account, and of course, it may be that the responsibility lies with politicians who use those emotions and stir up emotions in bad ways and excite the wrong kind of nationalism. But to turn to a more positive subject, you served as Archbishop Justin's chaplain at the heart of the establishment, but now you've got a new role. So tell us a bit about that role, Isabelle.
So I'm Secretary for Theology and Ecumenical Relations. So the theology part is taking part in lots of theological discussions about, that occupy the Church of England at any point in time. The ecumenism work is about helping to coordinate and sustain the ecumenical work of the Church of England. At the moment, that's a little bit in flux, thinking, how do we, what does ecumenism need to look like today? And today is a pandemic, which has led to different ways of working for churches throughout the world, really. It's the post-Brexit world. How do we relate to European churches in a world where relationships will have to be reconfigured? And how do we give a positive message? And it's also the world of post-Christendom to a degree,
Yes, indeed.
There is, the Church of England is still established, but actually the shape of establishment, I think, is changing. And we have to think, what does that mean in terms of ecumenism?
And in our diocese, we're particularly concerned with the post-Brexit reality and wanting to reassure our ecumenical friends and colleagues that we are still interested in them. And I wonder, from the perspective of the Church of England in England, how we can continue to demonstrate warmth and regard for and interest in European churches at a time when the politics is definitely running in the opposite direction.
Well, I think that there are two tasks in front of us. I think it's really important that as a church we articulate a theological and spiritual rationale for why we're doing that. That actually our Christian faith calls us to engage and to bridge gaps, not to widen them. And I would like to see the church actually articulating that quite powerfully. Whatever the political relationship we have, as Christians, we are members of the same body. And as fellow human beings, we have a duty to reach out to one another. I think practically, it's important to look at how we engage ecumenically with, there's ecumenical instruments such as the WCC or the Conference of European Churches. So we need to look at how we might engage with those instruments in the post-Brexit world. There's bilateral relationships with various other churches, whether it's the Old Catholic, the Meissen Agreement with the Germans, or Royer with the French Protestant. And I think paying attention to those relationships and saying, how do we work together? How do we model something that is positive and inspiring and not scary, actually? How do we show the potential that working together will have?
Thank you very much, Isabelle. And we are so grateful to hear you say that, and want to work with you as a diocese and with the Council for Christian Unity and with leaders in the Church of England in England to deepen as far as we can our fraternal relationships with sister churches and to participate in these multilateral ecumenical bodies like CEC and like WCC. And as we draw our time to a close, is there any one particular thing that people in our diocese can be praying for you as you set out in this new role?
For me, I think wisdom is probably always the key. Wisdom in helping change to happen, I think.
Yeah. We pray then that God will give you great wisdom and discretion and prudence and persuasiveness amongst your colleagues as you seek to help the church better in its relationships with other Christian bodies and organizations and churches. So thank you very much indeed, Isabelle, for the time that you've given us today.
Thank you. And thank you for all the work of the church in Europe. I actually have friends who attend churches, Anglican churches in France, and it's very special.